Today on the Root Cause Medicine podcast.
Every day we're exposed to toxins from the food, from the chemical. Even if you're the most cleanest person living in one with the nature and are making your own bread and homeschool and home birth and all the things, we come in contact with chemicals every single day. It's not possible to not come in contact with chemicals. The human body is made to detox on the regular basis. You do not need to do the January detox to detox. The body knows how to do it. Glutathione is super important to make that happen. So if we're taking a medicine that depletes this important chemical that helps us detoxify, it has a huge cascade effect down the line, interfering with the immune system.
Well, hello there. I'm your host for today, Dr. Kate Kresge, and we have an amazing guest for you. Dr. Anna Maria Temple is a pediatrician and eczema specialist who is here today to talk about the root causes of eczema and how you can heal it for good. You are going to learn a ton about the microbiome, nutrition, toxins, and what you can do with medications and what not to do to help your little one with eczema heal quickly. If you're an adult with eczema, this is also an amazing episode for you. Everyone in the whole family can benefit from what Dr. Anna has to say. Before we get started, though, I want to talk to you about something that comes up pretty often on this podcast. And that, of course, is lab testing. You see, testing is one essential way to understand the root cause of an illness. If you're an integrative or functional medicine practitioner, chances are you're placing a ton of orders with a ton of different labs. The Root Cause Medicine podcast is created by Rupa Health. Rupa is the best way to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different labs in one single place for free. Thank goodness. No need to create and log into multiple portals ever again. If you're a practitioner, make sure you go sign up at rupahealth.com to create your free account today. Now, let's start the show. Dr. Anna Maria, welcome to the Root Cause Medicine podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. I can't wait to get started.
Me too. I've been looking forward to this for a long time because you are a pediatrician who specializes in functional medicine and nutrition. But what I hear you talk a lot about, and actually the way I first met you, was by watching you give a phenomenal talk on eczema. I just want to start there and ask you, for all the parents listening who have kiddos with eczema, what's the most important thing you feel like they need to know?
Oh gosh, like we were discussing right before we went on air, right? We could spend hours, months talking about the topic. But yeah, having dealt with eczema in my own family, I would say the number one first step is knowing that there's more to eczema than a topical lotion, steroids, or immunosuppressants like Dupixent. When you have in your mind that there's more, you search, you open your mind, and you're ready to explore and help your children heal from within without depending on medicines forever. You may need medicines in the meantime as a Band-Aid while we heal. But when we have that mindset that there's more that we can heal from within, it opens up incredible amount of opportunities, and it opens up a world where there's so many possibilities and so much hope.
I am inspired already. Re-inspired. And I've heard you talk about this before, but I think people need to hear this. This condition can be really debilitating. And I know you had this condition in your own family, and you've seen so many kids in your practice dealing with this. Before we dive into testing and treatment and the fixes, let's frame the problem a little bit. How common is eczema? And what is actually happening in this condition? I think so many of us think of it as dry skin, but it's so much more than that.
So true. Eczema, about 50 years ago, the incidence was 1 in 15 people. And now it's 1 in 5. And in some ethnic backgrounds, it's 1 in 2. That means 50%, half your children are going to be affected by eczema. And I'll tell you, I see it in my practice all the time, whether you're doing holistic, whether you're doing traditional, whatever, eczema is coming in and its effects. And to your point earlier, it is so debilitating and is so heart-wrenching for the parents because you see the illness on your child's surface and you see their discomfort. And at times we feel so helpless as parents. And the common misconception is that eczema is a lotion deficiency. If I could just get the right lotion, I will fix the eczema. Now, again, could it be that somebody has a little bit of dry skin, maybe a little redness, you find a lotion and all is well? brilliant. But if you're on your fifth lotion, if you're $1,000 down the drain and nothing seems to be helping on the lotions, we may be dealing with a lot of a deeper issue. And there's many factors to eczema. Yes, could you have dryness of skin? Could the skin barrier just be malfunctioning? Absolutely. But that isn't a minority of people. The majority, we're dealing with gut microbiome issues. Have we had antibiotics in our past? Have the children been on anti-reflux medication? Have we used the most common medicine, Tylenol? Uses of Tylenol with increased use, you have increased risk of developing eczema, which no one talks about. How about nutrition? Where's our nutrition? If our children are eating a processed food, high in sugar, fast food, because in the Western world, we are dealing with a very highly ultra processed food, which leads to eczema. Food coloring, Easter's coming around the corner. Holidays are always around. Food coloring is ever present as our preservatives. That affects eczema. Dairy and gluten are issues because we eat them all the time. Whenever people go, they do food sensitivity tests and all this stuff. And I'm always like, notice that broccoli is never on the top. Brussels sprouts are not, is because the foods that we're most commonly come in contact with, that's what's going to make our system inflamed. What about stress? We do not talk about stress enough in our culture. Stress is a huge predisposing factor to eczema. And it's just a simple thing is that a lot of gurus, mindset gurus, associate skin issues with separation anxiety. And if you think of when does eczema occur, it starts in children less than 5 most often, children less than 2 even more often, and especially between babies 3 and 6 months old. I always say the baby got ripped out of the uterus, so the baby had to separate from mama. Right about between 5 and 6 months, they have to go with other caregivers. They're exploring the world. They're noticing that mama is sometimes there, but has to do other things. The separation comes. We see the itching happening at night. There's many nuances, but stress being one of them. And can we talk about our mamas and our parents and how stressed everyone is these days? That's contagious to the children, and the stress that the children pick up from the parents exacerbates their skin symptoms. What about micronutrient deficiencies? In our food sources, we don't have much magnesium, we don't have much zinc, we don't have iron, because the soil has to be full of these micronutrients for the plants to absorb them, and the animals eat the plants. So whether you're a carnivore or a vegan, the bottom line is the nutrients still have to be in the soil for us to eat them. Even if you eat the most whole foods, amazing diet, if the food is depleted in nutrients, then you don't have them. A lot of people are like, let me see what lotion to put on my skin, but you don't treat a zinc deficiency with a cream. Then we have toxins like mold, environmental things, the fragrances, the phthalates, the parabens, all the things in the different chemicals that we use to clean our home, to put on our bodies. The list goes on. And as we like to discuss in functional medicine, is the bucket is overflowing. So we have all these things coming in, and the human body, which is like a cup or a bucket, is becoming more stacked up with all these inflammatory things. And then spring comes along, and here blooms the oak, and boom, eczema is flaring everywhere because a cup of inflammation has now overflown, and now we're dealing with itching, bleeding, scratchy skin.
People may be surprised to hear that there's so many potential root causes. And I'm curious, is there a way you have of describing to parents why so many different things can lead to the same skin condition? What's the underlying pathology there?
In the Western medicine, we are taught you do the skin and you go to the dermatologist, and you have an asthma issue, so you go to the pulmonologist, and you have a stomach pain or constipation, you go to the gastroenterologist. We've been trained to think of our skin and our lungs and our gut as different individual entities for which we see a specific doctor. But our organs don't live in a little jar on a shelf. They all intermingle. So the common denominator is inflammation. When inflammation starts, for different people, it shows up in different ways. For a lot of people, we call it the eczema tract. When inflammation is going on, so let's say all the bucket that we talked about, now the child has a cold, or they get COVID, or they get flu. They're eczema flares. Somebody who has an inflammatory tract as ADHD, when the child gets COVID, when they get flu, they don't get eczema. they get an abnormal response in their behavior. They're now suddenly not focusing anymore. Their memory is off. They're like off the chain. They're throwing tantrums. Somebody who has a respiratory issue is their inflammatory tract. When they get COVID or flu, they're not getting a skin issue or neurological issue. They can't breathe. They're coughing. They're struggling with their lungs. The inflammation is common to everything. Is just how it's manifesting in bodies that is different, which can be confusing.
I love that explanation. And I like to drill down because I think it's interesting. I'm running into people now who they've heard the word inflammation used so much and so ubiquitously that they're almost like skeptical when they hear it. Are there some chemical mediators that you think of when you think of inflammation with eczema? A lot of people talk about Th1, Th2. Is there a part of the immune system we're particularly concerned about with eczema?
You're right. So the Th1, Th2 pathways are what's most often talked about in eczema. It's funny because I'm doing an integrative dermatology course and they're like, well, you shouldn't, it doesn't matter if you have seasonal allergies because that's a different track. I'm like, what? It may be a different track in a laboratory, but your B cells, your T cells, your neutrophils, your eosinophils, this is all Dr. Talk, guys, is all different cells that live together in the body and one stirs the other. And I think that we are arrogant as humans and we're arrogant as doctors if we think that we truly understand the immune system and we truly understand all the inner workings of the human body, because we don't. And yeah, so in eczema, you have your Th1 and Th2 pathways getting exacerbated, but they're intricately correlated with other things. And in some people, it's one thing. So when we talk about inflammation, what we're saying is, so let's use food, for example. So we're eating a food that doesn't fit our body. The food comes in and I'm eating it and I'm totally fine. I'm good. Something as innocuous as, let's say, peanuts. I'm eating peanuts or almonds or walnuts. So we don't come up with anything why those are not. All right, walnuts. And we're eating walnuts and it's great because we know it's great for skin. We know it's great for brain, la, la, la. Another person's eating walnuts. But for them, because of what's happened in the uterus, what's happened with mama before she gave birth, with dad before he helped mom conceive, or what happened right after birth, the nuts suddenly, the body is not accepting them as a friend. It's now decided that it's a foe and it's an enemy. The body now creates an antibody. And the antibody says, oh my gosh, walnuts. So whenever they see a walnut coming in, the body gets all upset, all annoyed, and it's ready to attack. Sometimes the body sees something that kind of looks like a walnut, but it's not a walnut. And now it attacks. Now everybody's confused. But now the more the body sees things that are like walnuts and it attacks, it creates more different cells that are trying to protect our body, but those cells are also getting confused. And now you just have a whole bunch of confused cells, immune cells running around the body. And then they're like, what? We also don't like dairy. Well, you know what? We should probably not like peanuts. We should definitely get rid of eggs. All of a sudden, you have one thing lead to another. And in fact, people with eczema have a 30% chance of food allergies. And that's not coincidence, is that one thing is triggering another thing. And if we're not paying attention and decreasing the inflammatory response, we get more and more inflammation. It's not a coincidence that 60% of kids with eczema develop asthma. 30%, like we talked about, develop food allergies. 60% develop seasonal allergies. This is all interconnected. It's almost like the way we should think of inflammation. It's like a little smoldering coal, if you will. And it's sitting deep in the center of your body. If we're not paying attention with it and the fire is getting a little stronger, as the fire is getting bigger, the eczema turns to asthma. The fire gets bigger. Now the eczema turns to asthma and seasonal allergies. Now we're inflamed. So now we have eczema, asthma, allergies, food allergies, ADHD, anxiety, depression. Now we have joint issues. What? The thyroid is a problem. It's a snowball effect because children don't have 1,000 diagnoses. It's usually one, and it starts with a smoldering ember in the core of your body that starts showing signs that we need to pay attention to.
It's fascinating because I think adults recognize that inflammation is a common cause of many adult chronic illness symptoms. We're kind of like, I got joint pain or I have brain fog. I must be inflamed. But I think so many of us think about kids as being so hardy and so resilient that they don't have any problems with inflammation. Inflammation is an old person disease. It sounds like in the past few decades, that might have been true 100 years ago or even 50 years ago, but it sounds like something has changed to where we're now seeing more of our children dealing with these autoimmune and inflammatory conditions. Can you talk us through like how we might understand why that is?
Yeah, because one of them, it's a huge frustration. In fact, probably the most common question I get, but why? They're like, I understand inflammation. I got you. I understand all the root causes. I got you. But why would a 3-month-old have eczema? They've not lived enough to get the bucket of inflammation full. And I was like, right, because we're thinking it wrong. Eczema begins in the uterus. Eczema actually begins even before preconception. An example that will really help everybody understand, if we take this lovely bacteria, he's called B. infantis. And B. infantis is a specific probiotic that lives in baby's guts. Well, it lives in mama's guts and goes into baby's guts. B. infantis in baby's guts he's very picky eater. He only eats oligosaccharides, which are like the breakdown in breast milk. So B. infantis only likes breast milk. And if he doesn't get breast milk, he leaves. B. infantis present in baby's guts. We've shown that kids that have B. infantis have less eczema, less allergies, less asthma, less type 1 diabetes, less ADHD, autism. The list goes on. Just B. infantis is an example. Okay, great. So all kids have B. infantis. What's the problem? They don't. 60 years ago, children, they did a study and 90% of the babies had B. infantis in their stool. Awesome. And they tested the same experiment just a few years back. Less than 5% of babies had B. infantis in their gut because B. infantis comes from mom or the dad. If they had a recurrent strep throat, if they had recurrent ear infection, they had a lot of antibiotics, they had steroids, they had acne, recurrent UTIs, sexually transmitted diseases, and so on, they had exposure to antibiotics. They did antibiotics and B. infantis left the body. Also, depends on what our food source is. A lot of people are like, oh, I've never been on antibiotics, so I'm good. Okay, do you eat food that is not organically grown, that is exposed to antibiotics? 60 to 70% of our antibiotic exposure actually comes from our food, not from urgent care. What are we eating? What are we putting in our bodies? A lot of people are like, I ate this food when I was younger and I was fine. So you're just weird with your reading ingredients. And I was like, actually, 40 years or so, I'm 50, right? So like 40 years ago when we ate cereal, we took cornflakes. It was corn, sugar, salt. Those are the ingredients in cornflakes. Today, the list of ingredients in cornflakes is preservatives, BHT, TBHQ, depending on the other cereals, food coloring, etc. And in order to get the cereal I always used to eat, you have to buy the organic version of it. And then since the 40 years ago, so many more chemicals have been allowed into the food source than we had one. So the food from 40 years ago is not the same as the food today. The food today is polluted and chemically toxic, which B. infantis does not like. Now we're having food that's polluted. We have the antibiotic exposure. Do we talk about stress? Let's talk about stress again. One more time. In Canada, they did a study during the Canada ice storm in 1996, where over 300,000 people got displaced. And it's called the Ice Storm Project. Everyone could Google this. And what they did is they followed the pregnant moms in Canada who were displaced by the ice storm compared to pregnant mamas in Canada that were not affected by it. And they followed the children for up to, I think we're at 19 years. They found for a minimum of 15 years. I want to say 19. Don't call me on the 19. Anyway, and what they noticed that the mamas who were displaced by the ice storm had to live with cousins, relatives, their homes were destroyed, etc., had significant increase in the children with eczema. Also asthma, cancer, diabetes, autism. The stress during pregnancy adversely affected the children when they were babies. When I had my firstborn, I was a resident internal medicine and pediatrics. No one talked to me about my stress. No one talked to me about my nutrition. I ate all the hospital garbage, whatever I could get my hands on. Home cooked meal was me getting like a frozen pizza and cooking it at home. And my diet in med school was Diet Coke and Pop-Tarts, guys. Diet Coke. Did anyone go, I'm going to be a doctor? Shouldn't you consider eating better? Nope, nobody said anything. So my diet was full of chemicals. My stress level was ridiculous. Oh, I was constipated, so I had lactulose and Miralax for 25 years. By the time I had my firstborn, who was a C-section birth, C-sections increased risk of eczema and allergic disease. She was plagued with eczema, asthma, allergies, recurrent ear infections, constipation, recurrent croup, and the list goes on. And it wasn't a coincidence. This is not to make people feel bad. This is just talking about why a 3-month-old is going to come on and have eczema is when all the things have already happened in the uterus and you didn't have the right guidance. Then we deal with chronic disease when you're 3 months old, and it's not okay.
Can people take B. infantis? Like someone might be thinking, oh my gosh, that's probably my baby. What can I do?
Right? If you don't have a vaginal birth, that B. infantis can go through because the reason that we poop, that us ladies, we poop on the delivery table, that's gross. But Mother Nature has made it so the baby comes in contact with the poo to get the bacteria from mama into the baby gut, which actually is super important. The same thing with all the vagina juices. The baby needs to inhale them and be one with them because that's where all the microbiome comes from. If the mama doesn't have it from all the things we talked about, what can we do? You can actually do B. infantis. I actually prefer that we do several strains of probiotics, not just B. infantis, but we want to make sure that we also have L. rhamnosus, L. reuteri. So Lactobacillus rhamnosus has been studied in pregnant mamas, especially in the third trimester, several different institutions, and shown that mamas who take L. rhamnosus, even just the third trimester, have significant decrease in eczema by over 50% and decrease in allergic disease.
That's amazing. Moms, before they're pregnant, when they're pregnant, can take these probiotics. I'm curious because I want to talk about babies taking them. Let's start there. But then I also want to know from you, are there any dangers with taking probiotics that people should be aware of? How do they pick a good one? Let's dive into this more.
Most babies, generally speaking, are totally fine taking a probiotic. There was one case recently in the neonatal intensive care unit that the child was taking a B. infantis specific probiotic, and they ended up getting necrotizing enterocolitis, which is infection of the gut, and they ended up with sepsis, which is infection of the blood, and the organism was B. infantis. That caused problems. So that's one case in millions of people that are taking probiotics. I'm not discounting it. We don't know the rest of the story, but I give probiotics from the moment the babies are born, whether you're doing a home birth, a vaginal birth, a C-section birth, I don't care. You're starting with B. infantis, L. rhamnosus, L. reuteri. So we do a multi-strain probiotic because the studies show that kids that have a multi-strain probiotic in the first 12 months of life have less eczema, asthma, allergies, neurological issues, autism, and ADHD.
How do you give it to a baby? Is it in a liquid form? How do you put it in their mouth? How do they get it?
There's a liquid formulation that you just like 2 drops. There's a powder formulation. You can just sprinkle on your boob and they just eat it while they're nursing. You can make a paste in your hand and just put it on the inside of their cheek. If you're doing bottles, you can just put it in the bottle and then you take it with a bottle. Either liquid or powders, either one works.
You mentioned something earlier that B. infantis, like the oligosaccharides in mama's breast milk. If someone isn't able to breastfeed, they might be worried, thinking like, I can't give my baby the food that the B. infantis needs. How do you educate moms about that? Or parents, I should say, about that?
There's formulas that already have the HMOs that are in that you can get them. So the infantis could eat them, or you can actually use, there's actually a supplement, they're little HMOs. The supplement's a powder form that you can put in the formula to add to that to ensure that the infantis is staying well fed.
This is really cool. Okay. And then how about the dangers? We talked about for neonatal, probiotics are bacteria. It makes sense to me that if you have a baby who's super sick or their immune system's really impaired and they're in the hospital, that may not be the best time. You really want to talk with your care team about that. When we're thinking about older kids and adults just trying to choose a good supplement, how do they choose a good one? And are there any side effects or risks that they should be aware of with taking probiotics?
We want to have a multiple strand probiotic. It depends on the company. There's some companies I used to be like, oh, it all needs to be refrigerated. But there's plenty of companies that now have shown that you can have shelf stable probiotics. And I usually go for multiple strands. So for children, I go at 25 billion colony units. And I want to make sure that we have a variety, not just B. infantis, just L. rhamnosus, L. reuteri. We want to have about 10 different strands, but those 3 have to be in there. And for adults, oftentimes, especially if the adult's suffering with eczema, we need to be at 118 billion, 120 billion, really strong probiotic because we're really trying to fix the gut microbiome. And oftentimes people, well, I'm just eating yogurt. Okay, the yogurt doesn't have that many probiotics in it. Also, we're dealing with dairy and it doesn't have the right strains of probiotics. So we really want to do multi-strand and 25 billion units for youngsters. And then teenagers and adults, we want to be like over 100 billion colony units. You can certainly do spore probiotics as well. Spore probiotics are awesome. They're shelf stable, so you don't have to refrigerate them. And they have different kinds of strands. You definitely have to talk to your doctor about which spore probiotic is right for you. And the other thing is that they're not going to work right away. You also need some time to let the body adjust to it. So some people will start taking a probiotic and their eczema flares. So of course, they're like, I'm done with this. This is horrible. But if we look at eczema ebbs and flows, flares, and you stop flaring, flare. And then the most common mistake people make is they start something and stop it very soon because they started eczema flares. They're like, it's the thing I started when the eczema was going to flare anyway. So the rule of thumb, you got to stick with something for a minimum of 2 weeks before you throw in the towel. Because with the probiotic, for example, it takes the body about 7 to 10 days to get used to the probiotic before we say, oh, this is definitely like horrible and it's not working. The same thing with zinc, with vitamin D, with any supplements. That's the number one thing. People, even lotions, they'll put a lotion on. I'm not better, so therefore it doesn't work. Or I'm a little red. I'm like, what? The body could be red because the body was stressed. The body could be red because now there's a dog. The body could be red because a virus is coming in. But we're so overly cause and effect that I do this, therefore this happens. And eczema is not like that. It ebbs and flows, and we got to stay steady for the course to see if actually something is working. This is probably the number one reason why people eliminate so many foods. And when we're talking about food elimination, here's a takeaway, guys. We never eliminate if we don't have a replacement. So if you want to remove dairy, you have to have an equal nutritious alternative. You're like, I'm not eating dairy, and then I'm not eating gluten, and I'm not eating eggs, and because then you just end up eating lettuce. And when you're eating lettuce, you can't heal because you have a micronutrient depletion. And then you don't have enough fats, you don't have enough protein. And of course, the Western medicine is like, food eliminations are horrible. I'm like, but yeah, when it's done wrong, it is horrible and we can cause bigger problems. But the reason that starts is because we're like, oh, I had a grape. They flared. It must be the grape. When your body's on fire, oftentimes anything makes it flare.
I think parents will be interested in hearing your approach. First, let me ask you, how do you dose probiotics? Is it like always on an empty stomach, away from food, always at night? Do you have a preference?
When I deal with children, I'm like, whenever they can take it, because I would love to be like at night before you go to bed on an empty stomach. Okay, that's nice. So I usually go whenever you can take it. You can take it with food. For some kids, actually taking it with food can help them have less of a histamine reaction to the foods. But whenever you remember, and then usually any supplement always starts slow. If you're going to start with a powder, start with a sprinkle before you get to the target dose. And there's no rush. So when our children are suffering, we want to be on 7 supplements yesterday. So the skin is better. But the body does not like many things at the same time, especially the human microbiome. We want to do a little sprinkle for a week daily. Oh, the sprinkle is good. Okay, now we're going to go maybe to a more double up the sprinkle. And then you get to have a capsule. And then you get to the full capsule. It may take you a whole month to get to the target dose. But that is okay, because if you rush the body, that's when we see side effects. And that's another reason that people stop using it, because they didn't take their time to get to targeted doses.
Do you tell your parents of your kiddos, like, we're going to take 6 months and we're going to take this slow, and at the end of this 6 months, the eczema will be improved? How do you frame expectations about timeline?
I tell them, I'm like, you know what? We have been trained without realizing that when you put steroids on the body, the eczema is better in 24 hours. People go, I know, functional medicine takes time. I got it. Yep. 2 weeks in, we're not better. How come we're not better? Nothing's working. I'm like, whoa, hold on. The skin doesn't regenerate for 30 days. If we're expecting the skin to just be better in 2 weeks, I'm like, the skin cells haven't regenerated. And here's the other thing. The human body doesn't like to heal with a stopwatch. So if you're hovering over the body, is it better yet? Are you still scratching? Where are you still scratching? Was it still red? Is it still bleeding? Why are we still bleeding? Why? The body's stop touching me. Stop looking at me. Give me a second. Because we cannot heal under pressure. And again, that's a stress that the parents put on themselves, which then goes to the children. And now the children's bodies are like, we're not healing. Why aren't we healing? We need to be healing. How come we're not healing? I mean, their body cannot heal under that kind of pressure. So that's why I tell them, I'm like, and each human body has their own timeline. It is for us to support you and to support them to see what their timeline is going to be. I say, yeah, by 6 months, we expect 50% improvement if you follow the steps in my program, because there's a lot of people that don't. So they'll like sign up and then they're like, but then I found this remedy on Instagram, but your program's not working. I'm like, you're not actually even doing the program. It's just because we're so panicked and we're so stressed. I understand. And that's why I love what I do in my program, because we have group lives every day of the week. When you feel like you found something amazing on Instagram, let's talk about it. When you feel like you're flared, let's talk about it. Because our job, the best thing that we do is we keep you on the course, and then we let the body do its thing. And we're like, stop touching the baby. Stop touching the baby. And you leave them all. It's fine. They're flaring. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, it's working. I'm like, I know. It just took for your child 3 months. Have kids gotten better in 2 weeks? Absolutely. But some kids take them 6 months. And as an adult, if you've had eczema for 30 years, it's probably going to take you years to get better. 6 months ain't nothing, because it takes almost as much time to get well as it took to get sick.
Parents are probably thinking, I kind of want you to walk us through what your typical approach is. With everybody, Do you start with probiotics and a certain type of supplement? How do you guide parents through this process of healing and what they should choose to focus on first?
Nutrition, guys. There's no supplement you can take. You cannot out supplement a diet that doesn't fit your body. I cannot tell you how many people have spent thousands and thousands of dollars on specialists and that specialist. And when they come in, I was like, okay, so how much processed food are you eating? And they're still eating Chick-fil-A and they're still eating Doritos. I'm like, we got to go from the top. So, number one thing we do is we remove processed food from our diet. If you can't eat it, don't eat it. If you have to Google an ingredient, it should not be in your body because you know what your skin cells can do? Your skin cells can't Google. So if you don't know what it is, how's your body know what it is? Nothing. So we only eat real food. It takes time. It's okay. I've been on this journey for 15 years for us to change our reading ingredients and changing our nutrition. Then we're going to add plan points because the no, 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 no culture is not good for mental health for the parent or for the child. And then it's like, I can't have that and I can't have that. Nah. So we're going to be like, look how many plan points. So I do a plan point challenge. Plan points are you take a bite of a strawberry, that's 1 point. You have one apple, that's 1 point. So it's plant diversity because the more plant diversity, the longer the probiotics you're going to take are going to hang out. Because if you eat McDonald's and take probiotics, you've just made expensive poop. It's not going to do anything. We're going to remove processed foods. We're going to add plant points. Reduce sugar to less than 24 grams a day. If you have a child less than 2 years old, there has to added sugar is 0 grams per day. And added sugar in less than 2 years old includes maple syrup, honey, etc. So if we're dealing with eczema, we want to be at 0 grams of added sugar in kids less than 2 years old. Fruits are not added sugar unless it's fruit juice, but fruits are not added sugar. And then we go to dairy and gluten as we replace those. I can't tell you again how many people, especially babies, that they are on a cow milk formula or they go to goat milk. Fair, awesome. But they're like, we're not doing dairy, we're doing goat. I'm sorry, that's actually still an issue. So we need to remove from goat, sheep, camel, cow. All those have to go away, have to be replaced with an equally nutritious alternative. And then, of course, we do a gluten removal replacement. Only after you've done those steps do we move to supplements. And we start with basics, and that's going to be vitamin D. Tremendous amount of research behind vitamin D and eczema. We go to zinc. Not all zinc is created equal, my friends. Not everything you get from the counter is created equal. We do omega-3s. Then we go to digestive enzymes, and then we'll do probiotics as this is our starting point.
Let's talk about dairy for a second. Why, in your mind, is dairy such a problem? And what is the nutritious replacement for it?
Again, dairy, it just permeates our culture to no end. So if the babies can nurse, we give them a cow milk formula. Then after that, then we tell them to drink 3 to 4 glasses of milk a day after the age of 1, because if they don't drink milk, they're not going to grow. And if they don't drink milk, I'm like, what? And there's not enough calcium because for some reason, we've only isolated calcium as the only nutrient in the Western medicine diet that we talked about. Because the moment you say you can't have dairy, everyone's like, oh, well, you don't have calcium. I'm like, how come we don't talk about B12? Why don't we talk about iron? How about zinc? Let's talk about those guys. How come those guys get kicked to the curb? When the mamas eating dairy are going to have to stop eating dairy in order for the baby to not have dairy. And by the way, when mama removes/replaces something from breast milk, it takes about 2 weeks for it to leave the breast milk. So just because you stopped your cheese yesterday, it's going to be 2 weeks before it leaves your system. And then it takes another 2 weeks for the babies to leave the system. So we're talking like a month to see the effect of mom removing something from her diet, generally speaking. Can it happen faster in some people? Of course, but that's just a general rule. And so when kids are over the age of 1, they don't need milk. Because here's in America, where the dairy industry paid a lot of money to have a glass of milk on myplate.gov, is the only country in the world that exists in. And we think that because it's here, because if you look in Europe, there's no milk on myplate.gov, whatever version they have. When you look in Canada, that's not that. It's only in the United States. And that's because the dairy industry paid money to the government to have their milk on that sheet. It's propaganda. I'm sorry. In all the other countries, milk is part of the protein section. And the protein with meat, seafood, whatever, that's where the dairy is. It's not its own thing. The Mediterranean diet, there's no cup of milk that sits on the side. So it's a fallacy. We can have plenty of foods. You can do salmon, you can do sardines, avocados, you can do nut butters, all kinds of foods you can do if the children can tolerate. I'm all about organic soy in the people that can tolerate it. If you're having an issue with soy, don't eat it. But organic soy when you know where it's from. It actually is a great source of calcium. Nuts are a great source of calcium, green leafy vegetables. Mother Nature has already put tons of minerals and vitamins in all other food sources. So if you're left on a desert island and there's no milk or cheese, you're actually going to survive just fine with strong bones, because the super secret ingredient for strong bones is actually vitamin D.
I know that you have made this own change in your family with your kids, because it's overwhelming to think about if you are used to Cheerios in the morning and chips and a hot dog for lunch and pizza for dinner. Those are all processed foods. People might be wondering, what will we even eat?
I know. The beautiful thing is, I gave all the processed foods to my children. My children's breakfast was Cinnamon Toast Crunch and Lucky Charms and Pop-Tarts. And when I wanted to make a warm breakfast, it was toaster strudels. That's right. And I would write their names in icing. You know it. Yeah. But then they were like, why does my middle son have ADHD? It was weird. What? Can't he focus in school? And then in their lunch, we had juice boxes. We had Nature Valley granola bars. We had Uncrustables, yogurt squeezies, the Go-Gurts, food coloring and yogurt. Amazing. And then dinner, I would buy the frozen meals that I would cook on the stove. And I was like, oh, it's a home cooked meal. I get it. We were fully processed family. And when I realized that, I went to a nutrition lecture, and when the lady talked about the ingredients, I was like, oh, hold on. Just because my children eat broccoli at dinner and strawberry in their lunchbox doesn't mean that they're eating a whole foods diet. We had to start slow. And I started with just the basics. I started making smoothies at breakfast. I didn't say no to the Cinnamon Toast Crunch. I said, you can have that after you have the smoothie. And my first smoothie, everyone, was literally whole milk, ice cream, vanilla ice cream, and strawberries. Because what I'm always like about Jedi mind tricks and I'm a long play kind of girl. I'm like, I have a vision and how we're going to get there. And it's going to be a little messy in the beginning. And I was like, if I can get these jokers to accept a strawberry ice cream milkshake for breakfast, I could work with that. And sure enough, they were like, what? Strawberry ice cream milkshake for breakfast? Score. For several weeks, that's all it was. And then after that, I added spinach, just one leaf. And it was still pink and it still tastes like strawberries. After some time, I removed the ice cream slowly and replaced it with vanilla ice cream. And then after that, I removed the dairy and then added like oat milk. And then I added avocados and then I added mangoes. But this took years. If you look at our smoothie now, 15 years later, there's no traces except the strawberries that used to be. But I started slow. I gave them small amounts. I didn't make the cereal a no. Over time, the smoothie got packed with more and more great nutrients. It got bigger in size. So over time, they stopped eating the cereal. And the cereal would just sit in their bowls. Then the cereal would just sit in the pantry. And then we would go months when no one would even touch the cereal. I weaned out the cereal without being a tyrant about it. I was tyrant about other things. But I'm just saying, in that example, it was like slow steps because I knew I was in for the long play. Now, if I knew what I know now, I probably would have gone a little faster, but I didn't, which is fine because we made the changes. But as I changed my children's food, eczema went away, their asthma went away, ADHD went away, their seasonal allergies went away. My little one was on 5 allergy medicines. So when Easter would come around, he could not go and do an Easter egg hunt because his eyes would swell shut, his tears would stream down his face, his body was covered in hives, he'd be on the ground writhing. And when I took him to the doctor, they're like, we've run out of medicine. Only next step is allergy shots. He was 2 years old. 2 years old. That's when I was like, that's not how we're going to play this. That is not how we're playing this. And that's when I realized that we needed to change food. And then over time, it took 5 years, he came off all his allergy medicine. My point, small steps, see which thing and do it in a way that is sustainable. This is not a temporary thing. We are changing our lifestyle forever. And when you change forever, it has to be done slow. If it's just I'm doing a quick detox, kind of sugar detox, okay, cool. You do that aggressive in 7 days, but go slow with a big vision that all is going to change.
I can hear people wondering what your program is called and how they can sign up. Can you tell us, what is your program? What are some of the books you've written about this for people who want to go learn more?
Because this is, a lot of people are like, exactly like, how do we hear this information? A lot of people say my kids are picky. And my husband was picky. I had a picky eater. My third born is picky, but the husband was picky. And I'll argue that the husband might have been pickier than the third born. Anyway, over time, because I'm perseverant and I'm highly annoying and tenacious, the man changed his eating habits at the age of 40. So if the picky eating husband at the age of 40 could change his taste buds and change to a whole different nutrition, so can your 2-year-old, I promise. And not only did my husband change his taste buds, he wrote Ending the Eczema Epidemic book. He's an orthopedic surgeon who did not believe in food as medicine. And now he is 100% champion. So Ending the Eczema Epidemic is written by Mr. Dr. John Temple. And we talk about all the things we talked about here, plus more. We go in depth into all the other things. And then if your child is not suffering with eczema and you just want to turn things around, or you have other issues that you're dealing with, we did a book called Healthy Kids in an Unhealthy World, where we go through picky eating, how to get more plant points in, what's fluoride and how to deal with it, what about sleep, how to get kids to play outside, what about sugar, what about holidays, what about the detergents, all the different things that we're always talking about. And we have a little handy dandy book that's bullet points, that is more like a reference manual where you can go to the chapter that you need and you just get the story. And we would love to have you, if you're struggling with eczema, in our eczema transformation program, which we have it online available to everybody worldwide. We have transformed thousands of people's lives, and we have helped educate people on nutrition, on how to heal from within. Whole families are healing because we expect that the whole family does a program. And when the whole family does a program, just the other day, I had a mom, she's like, I lost 10 pounds. My husband lost 10 pounds. He no longer has migraines. My seasonal allergies are so much better, because we're changing not just one little human, because the little human is, when we do holistic medicine, we talk about the person as a whole, their family, their community, their culture, their country. It's the change has to be global in order to happen. It doesn't happen overnight. We do one step at a time for great change.
I know with little ones, we don't like to do a ton of blood testing, but are there tests that you recommend, like an eczema panel, maybe for an adult who's like, what can I ask my doctor for? I can get some really good insight into some of the things you're talking about, whether it's my vitamin D status or my omegas. What's your ideal panel for someone who does want to check?
Little dudes have low veins, so we're just going to do a little bit of blood work, and that's just a simple CBC with differential, a zinc RBC. Make sure they do zinc RBC, not just zinc, vitamin D. If you can just get those 3 things, amazing. If they could add a ferritin, even better. But those are the things, those are my minimal things for little babies, little tiny babies, little toddlers. As we get older, we're going to do CBC with diff. We're going to do our iron panel, ferritin, vitamin D, zinc RBC, copper RBC, MAG RBC. There's a fancy one, TGF beta 1. A lot of the regular docs are not going to get that. That's a marker of inflammation and stuff. For the adults, you can get your thyroid antibodies, because if you have an autoimmune issue going on already, that is going to affect your eczema. I do love a seasonal allergy panel, environmental panel for where you live. That gives you some great information like, the oak and the elm are an issue. Now, that doesn't mean that we're just not going to go outside. That means, okay, when I have a flare, it's not the grapes that I'm eating, it's the oak that's blooming. And then we're going to not remove as many foods. So that gives really good information. We're going to look at as adults, we're going to look at our thyroid. We want to look at our kidneys. For older kids and adults, B12 and folate, B6. Those are important nutrients for the DAO enzyme, which is an enzyme we all have in our gut that breaks down histamines. And if you could get an omega panel, that's great. I've not been able to do that in my patient population for various reasons. But yeah, if you can get an omega panel, that would be fabulous.
Why do you check RBC? Let's clarify for the listeners who may not know what that means. RBC stands for red blood cell. Why do you check for minerals in red blood cells versus serum, which is what you're checking for? If it just says zinc serum or just zinc, usually that's what's being checked. Why is it important for you to go the extra mile and look at red blood cells?
Because the zinc, just global zinc, is not an accurate measurement. We want to see what the zinc level is inside the cell. That's going to be our most accurate measurement. I can't tell you how often the total zinc is normal and the zinc RBC is abnormal. And I cannot tell you how many times we see a low zinc, we fix the zinc, and the parents are like, my gosh, the eczema is so much better. I'm like, ah. And so in the traditional model, the only time they check zinc is if you have celiac disease and you have acrodermatitis enterohepatica, which is a specific rash that comes with celiac disease, which signals zinc deficiency. I'm like, okay, so we have a GI issue that leads to malnutrition, and we know there's a zinc issue. Why don't we assume that's a thing for everybody? Anywho, so the data is very strong that zinc deficiency and eczema. So again, that if you can get lab work, it's very helpful to guide your treatment and also expectations. Because if your zinc is normal and you take zinc, Yes, it might help your eczema, but not as much as somebody that is zinc depleted.
I love that you mentioned that because I think there's a tendency in our culture where we'll take ibuprofen for pain, it will fix your pain because ibuprofen is magical for pain. No, it's interfering with a specific biochemical process in your body that creates inflammation. That's why it works. And in the same way, being zinc deficient is going to impair your immune system, make you more prone to skin issues. When you replete zinc, when you just start to give your body what it needs, it will heal itself. I love that you clarified that because it's not that these nutrients are magic, it's that they're needed. And if you don't have them, you can't do the repair that you're supposed to be able to do. Now, I bring up ibuprofen because I had to ask you this. You mentioned this at the very beginning, and I want you to explain to folks why would taking ibuprofen be linked with eczema and what can parents do instead?
Yeah, so actually, it's Tylenol. They thought ibuprofen was going to be the problem in asthma. They did a huge study where kids with asthma were brought into the clinic, urgent care visits, ERs, and they were either given ibuprofen or Tylenol. And then they followed them out to see who comes back with more exacerbations because their theory was the ibuprofen. And it turned out it was actually Tylenol or acetaminophen or paracetamol. The Tylenol group, I don't have to say all the names, that actually showed a significant increase in respiratory issues, in asthma exacerbations with recurrent use. So then they said, well, let's take this to the next level. What about how does it have an impact on eczema? And there was a study in 580,000 children from multiple hospitals across the world where they just followed the kids in the hospital who were given doses of Tylenol. And then they followed them out for eczema and asthma. And they showed a very strong correlation between Tylenol dosing, developing eczema and asthma. And the more doses, the higher the risk of developing those inflammatory conditions. The study was so convincing that in New Zealand, they're actually conducting they rolled out a 10-year study to assess the impact of Tylenol on asthma and allergic disease. What happens with Tylenol and acetaminophen, it depletes glutathione in the body. Glutathione is a very important detoxification molecule that the liver uses and the body uses to get rid of toxins. And we hear the word toxins all the time. We're like, but every day we're exposed to toxins from the food, from the chemical. Even if you're the most cleanest person living in one with the nature and are making your own bread and homeschool and home birth and all the things. We come in contact with chemicals every single day. It's not possible to not come in contact with chemicals. The human body is made to detox on the regular basis. You do not need to do the January detox to detox. The body knows how to do it. Glutathione is super important to make that happen. So if we're taking a medicine that depletes this important chemical that helps us detoxify, it has a huge cascade effect down the line, interfering with the immune system.
We are learning so many clinical pearls. I am so grateful that you are here with us today. I have one more question before I let you go. I can picture if I was a parent thinking, okay, I'm in for the 6-month thing and I'm just going to let go of expectations and expect that in 6 months this will be better. But my heart is breaking every time I see my kid and their itchy, painful skin. What are some things that actually might provide some relief topically or temporarily, especially as you're waiting for all the natural interventions to kick in?
Totally, absolutely, because you can. And if your child is bleeding, scratching, oozing, it's very hard to heal if your skin is continuously open to the environment. So the first thing is we are not going to do bleach baths. Repeat after me, everyone. No bleach baths. The data doesn't even show that it helps with Staph aureus. The data doesn't even show that it is beneficial. The data is lukewarm that it might help with itching. Lukewarm data, that's what we're using. So can we just get rid of that chemical off our children's bodies? Instead, we're going to use hypochlorous acid. Hypochlorous acid is amazing at keeping the Staph aureus counts down. 90% of people with eczema are overcolonized with Staph aureus. When we're overcolonized with Staph aureus, that makes us red, itchy, scratchy. So hypochlorous acid from head to toe, it can be Force of Nature, it could be Active Skin Repair, Skin Smart, Briotech 2. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We're just going to do a head to toe once or 2 times a day. We can look for an emollient that helps. And again, we're not going to spend $4,000 on it, but my go-to is emu oil is fantastic. There's Magic B12 cream. and Cometas would be like some of that I would try. If we have a continuous Staph aureus issue, Gladskin is non-antibiotic topical cream that decreases Staph aureus with a digestive enzyme. And then in really hard cases, we may have to use steroids. But if you use steroids, which is okay, you're not a bad parent if you need steroids, please make sure that you have a proper weaning protocol in place. We can't just do 7 days of steroids and then we stop. And then we do 7 days of steroids and we stop. That causes rebound and that makes the eczema even worse. And in some kids, it makes them lead to topical steroid withdrawal. So we have to be really careful. So again, yes, can we use steroids? Absolutely. We have to use them judiciously. I prefer the Dr. Aaron's compound if your doctor will do that. And then you wean slowly, not in just a couple of days. We can use some antihistamines. If they work, Zyrtec, Claritin, make sure they're dye-free. There's homeopathy. Biboron is allergy calm. Genexa has a homeopathy as well. At nighttime, if the itching is out of control, you can certainly try some Benadryl. If you're using prior dose of Benadryl and it's not working, it's because it's not a histamine issue and we're dealing with a neurological issue. And then we really need to start talking about what is stressing the child out. Let's get into the psyche. What needs do they perceive that are not being met?
Dr. Anna Maria, you are amazing. I am so glad that you are teaching parents, adults, kids, clinicians, how to help heal this disorder that we are just seeing grow at exponential rates. But you are part of the solution, and I'm so thankful for it. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I love talking about this and helping families heal their kids with less medications.
We will have you back.
Sounds good.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much for listening to today's episode.
We have one quick favor to ask you before you go.
If you loved today's conversation, would you mind leaving us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on right now?
Our whole goal is education. So positive reviews are actually the #1 thing that help new people discover the show.
You're amazing, and we appreciate it so much.
We'll catch you next time on the Root Cause Medicine Podcast.